I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on AO 2019-128, repealing the requirement to charge a fee for providing an alternative bag. Let's go ahead and do introductions, starting on this side.
Pete Peterson.
John Weddleton.
Nate Zalatow.
Cameron Perez-Verdia.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Ronstadt.
Felix Rivera.
Dyson.
And then,
I'm Chrissy Arms with the Municipal Attorney's Office. I'll try to go.
thank you. And then if you can introduce
John
me.
McNabb, District 3 member.
Okay, thank you. All right. So,
Mr. Chairman,
oh yes, yeah. Forgot we have people on the phone. Go ahead.
Crystal Kennedy online. Thank you. Suzanne LaFrance online as well.
And I also think Mr. Gates is on the line as well. Okay, so Ms. Kennedy, this is your ordinance. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to you to get us started. If you have any comments that you'd like to give on the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I have several comments, so thank you for the opportunity to get started on this. I have you on speakerphone, so if that is breaking up or is somehow not coming through very clearly, let me know and I'll just switch to regular handhelds. But anyway, so this ordinance or this amendment would amend the bag ban ordinance in such a way to hopefully better define what plastic bags truly are. It's pretty broadly defined right now, so we have, for the most part, eliminated everything made of plastic. And it's also very narrowly defined reusable bags, so this amendment would help to better define and describe what a reusable bag actually is and what would be permitted. The other thing, the big thing, is it would eliminate the 10-cent fee. I have lots of comments about that, so I don't know if you want me to get into that right now, but for the most part, obviously it's been a major cause of customer dissatisfaction. It's causing businesses to lose their previous volume of sales. It's put a lot of retailers at the forefront of the brunt that customer dissatisfaction. And there's definitely just a sense that it is punitive, that it really isn't getting to the actual desire to reduce plastic bags. If we want to reduce the use of plastic bags, then let's eliminate plastic bags, or at least those what I would call the disposable one-use type bags. So for the most part, I've got plenty of anecdotal information to support a lot of the reasons why some of this is necessary. I think really one of the biggest roadblocks to this current ordinance is the fact that, like I said, it really broadly defines plastic bags and it narrowly defines reusable bags. And that's caused a great deal of confusion, I think, even amongst the municipality in trying to explain to people what is allowed and what isn't. It continues to be confusing, I think, to the point that, which is really kind of ironic, even the municipality is actually distributing plastic bags. So there's a lot of misconception about what a reusable bag is and what is made of plastic. So that's something that I would love to explain a little bit further, and we'll do that if anybody wants more of an explanation. But for the most part, the nice little blue Anchorage assembly bags that we've been toting around our budget books in are actually made of plastic and are therefore considered prohibited. So that's just one example. Happy to talk about some other things, particularly what we can possibly do. I think, well, let me say this. I think what we could probably have a good discussion on is how we do better define the kind of plastic that we want to get rid of and the kind of plastic that should be allowed. And certainly want to talk more about how to just put that into some kind of language that's more understandable. So I'm open to that. But for the most part, there's just so much confusion going on. We've got to do something to make this work better and to actually meet the goal that it, I think, was intended, and that was to reduce the use of those flimsy one-time plastic bags. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure I'll be happy to jump in when other questions come up or comments. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Kennedy before I turn it over to Mr. Constant to go over his amendment? Mr. Perez-Verdia.
I just wanted to ask one question through the chair to Ms. Kennedy. You said the goal was to reduce the use of plastic bags, and I guess I just want to ask if, from your perspective, that was the goal of the ban originally.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I do, Mr. Presbyter, I believe that is the intent. I am also looking at the original ordinance. In fact, bear with me here. I have to flip through a lot of computer things. But in looking at the original language from the original amendment in the whereas, it talks about the use of single-use disposable plastic shopping bags. And that's what burdens the environment, endangers wildlife, and has been shown to be harmful to bodies of water. Then it goes on and talks more about the plastic bags, but basically the idea of switching from free disposable plastic bags to reusable shopping bags is a valid alternative to reduce plastic bag usage. So, yes, from my perspective, what I believe, I mean, obviously you and I both, Mr. Presbyter, weren't on the assembly at the time, right, but it sounds like that the real effort or the real motivation behind this was to eliminate the soft, flimsy, single-use, disposable plastic shopping bags. So does that answer your question? Yeah. And what I would say then, though, is we have plastic bags, reusable plastic bags, like those handy little ones that feel like they're some kind of a brushed fabric. They're actually a polymer. They're called poly non-woven. So they literally are made by sheets of plastic, cut into those nice little shapes, sewn together in some way, and treated chemically, stamped and treated chemically to look woven and to be soft, but they are still absolutely made of plastic. So if the goal is to get rid of all plastic, then we are really seriously looking at some incredibly expensive adjustments for our retailers as well as consumers. Thank you.
I would just add, before I cede my time, that that's something that hopefully we want to talk about today, and hopefully some of the people who were involved in it clarifying that goal, because my understanding of the goal, the broader goal, was to begin to shift the culture around single-use disposable bags, whether it's a plastic or it's a paper bag, because we had shifted from paper to plastic at one time, so that to begin to move into a culture of reusable bags, whatever those bags are made of. So that was part of my understanding. So I'd like to hear from, at some point, from people who were involved in it.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah. So I'm missing something. How come my newspaper still comes in a single, really flimsy bag? Didn't we outlaw those? No. Why not?
Is it my turn?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Mr. Constable.
Okay. Thank you. There are thousands of things that we could approach and work on to make a better system. And the Chuck Maroon, Strong Towns, has an incrementalist approach to change that when we're facing big problems, sometimes we get paralyzed because the problem is so big, but instead our smart move is to do the smallest thing we can do. Instead of do everything all at once, start small. And so the theory of going for the single-use plastic bags started again up in Fort Yukon, Alaska. First place in the world was because this is a small thing that we can stop at the point of entry into the market. And so we did not go handleless bags. We did not, in the ordinance as written, stop restaurants from being able to protect spillable items within a bag.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, if you want to interject, I have a whole presentation.
Yeah, so when we had this on the table first, it was a pretty simple first step, and you amended it to include quite a bit more stuff, as I remember, when we were considering. Is my memory correct?
Or exclude one more item. We amended it to exclude plastics of 4 mils or above. So, but if I might kind of lay out the other case, then we might have a more full conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
So, I actually agree with Ms. Kennedy on the definition of reusable bag is inapt. It doesn't actually define what we want. We did the best we could with what we had, and I agree that this bag right here, provided by the clerk, would not be an acceptable definition of a reusable bag because it's not effectively woven. And the definition with the word cloth, the attorneys up above on the 7th floor and code enforcement have looked closely and decided cloth means it must be woven. Therefore, this is not acceptable. So I have an amendment that would take the previous definition in the original version of the ordinance from Ms. Kennedy, which is that is designed and manufactured to withstand repeated use over time, and added a small phrase, and is machine washable, which gets to the point where we aren't any longer just going to +4 mil plastic bags like they do at the Wasilla Walmart.
What line is that on, Chris?
That's the amendment. It's the bottom 2 lines.
Amendment sheet as well.
Oh, I see. I see. Thank you.
So, however, Ms. Kennedy's ordinance goes very far, actually, in undoing the work that we've done, and that is it repeals the fee completely from all transactions, and it brings back plastic bags into restaurants wholesale, just reintroduces plastic bags right back into the waste stream. And so before I make the case why the fee is important and why we want to give this time to percolate further and work, I've invited Donovan Camp from Plastic Free Anchorage to talk about why the fee, because a lot of people think that's just government overreach and being punitive. And so there's a lot of analysis, and I've provided for you the reports that he emailed over to us. Probably only have 2 instead of 4 because they're such thick documents. I wanted to make sure only those who wanted them got them instead of printing 35 pages of extra paper. So, Mr. Camp, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll put you in the queue.
There's some questions I would like answered before we hear from Mr. Camp, because they may be answered by him if he hears them, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
2 questions. One, why machine washable, not just washable?
Right.
So that's my first question. And the second is, I'd like to know what's the current enforcement, if I understand correctly, is complaint driven. If I'm correct, because I'm getting calls from retailers. I'm just going to throw out what I'm hearing, and then it can maybe be addressed. Is that they're either not going to charge, and they're not charging, that they're charging, but they don't think it's fair because they know others aren't charging, and that some people have to charge and some people don't. And even retailers sometimes have to charge in one instance and not in another because they run that vendor line at markets. They pop up at a market, they don't have to charge, and then in the brick and mortar they have to charge. So I just kind of want to toss that out to be addressed, because I feel like the fee is really inequitable and not consistently applied or enforced. So that, I just want to throw that out so it can maybe be addressed, because that's where my questions around the fee come from, or my wrestling with it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for letting me talk here in front of the assembly. My name is Donovan Camp. I represent Plastic Free Anchorage today. We're a group that's very invested in the amount of litter and plastic that we're seeing in Anchorage here, and it's just something that I care about a lot. I've cleaned out a lot of plastic bags from our cities, around our creeks in particular. So a lot of research that I've done all kind of points to the fee being the most critical part of a plastic bag ban as far as motivating people to start reducing waste and getting a bag. I have a paper here by the American Economic Journal, and they look at the difference between fees and benefits and no fees, and it all just kind of clearly shows that a small fee is just the only way to motivate people to start bringing their own bags because of a loss aversion tactic. It's not so much that it's like a price thing, because if you get benefited to bring a bag for 10 cents, you see no change. If anybody would like to turn to page 187.
Which report?
Oh, and this is the American Economics Journal. 10 small incentives have large effects.
Maybe you didn't get that one. But
have
Here's-
some more copies.
Okay.
What age did you say?
187, it's at the top right.
Did we have it?
It's the one that, yeah, that
One
one.
of the larger ones.
Yeah.
And it shows there's 3 counties that had never implemented a tax. There's a graph here. We're looking at 2 graphs where you never see a tax post period, and then always taxed. And then the lighter and darker colored bars show a pre-period and post-period. And you can see if there's no taxing in the first graph, you see the use of disposable bags stays the same. When you implement a tax or a fee, you see a dramatic drop in disposable bags being used. And then in Washington, it was pre and post, so very similar. And then in the next graph, we see a large spike in usage of reusable bags. But you can see in the tax, if you do not have a tax, there's no change in behavior without a tax of a bag when you implement the bag ban. And then there's one more graph on page 194. And this actually shows the difference between giving people a bonus for bringing a bag. And again, we see in the 3 different counties with no incentives in the first bars, there's no change. It's kind of the control. When you give people a bonus to bring their own bags, 10 cents, you see no change. But then when you have a fee or a bonus and a fee, you have the exact same results of a dramatic change in a drop in disposable bag usage. And then in the next graph, you see a rise in bringing your own bags and producing less waste and litter. So I think the fee is probably the most important part of this bag ban, actually. And I think stripping the fee would be very detrimental to the intent of this ban or this ordinance. I'm happy to hear that there's some realization of the intent of this. It's not so much to attack bags in general. I think the motivation of this is the litter that we're seeing. And we're not, like plastic-free Anchorage, we often get mistaken as being anti-plastic. Sometimes, you know.
Because your name is Plastic Free Anchorage.
Yeah. But it's really, we want to see a Anchorage environment being more plastic-free, you know. And so it does start a conversation because I have a bike helmet, and people often note that that's made of plastic. But that's not what we're about. We're about, you know, these single-use plastic items and single-use waste that we're seeing and we kind of see that as an intrinsic aspect of handing out free single-use waste products that don't have that cost associated with them at the point of transaction. And then, let's see how we have. And then there is the California. This is the final environmental impact report. It looks like this. And this has a really good, this was a study done for when California, county in California went plastic-free ban and also implemented the bag fee. And if on page 5 we see some numbers here that show us that it actually took 3 years for reusable habits to form. In the first year, we see 151% of cloth-like reusable bags being used and 150% of people not using a bag. But by the 3rd year, we see a 210% cloth-like reusable bag usage and no bag. Another really interesting thing is that paper bag usage actually returns to the previous no ban level at some point. So the reusage actually goes so far as to get our alternative bag use to prior use, like such as paper. I think the other aspect of this amendment is the 4 millimeter bag thickness being allowed. I think it's kind of shown in several states when they allow that the businesses then replace any of the paper bag usage that we see with these 4mm bags. And if we don't have a fee, then we'll basically just be taking the smaller bags and changing that into usage of thicker bags. And it'll just be moving that to where everyone's just using thicker bags.
So that's a single-use thicker bag in that case?
They're called reusable, but there's not a lot of evidence saying that they are. There is evidence showing that these are just being replaced in the waste stream. From the thinner ones are just being replaced. There's no real change at that point. I noticed that there was, as I said, from comments that I heard that, this isn't an attack on flimsy bags. This is a movement to try to reduce the waste and litter that we're seeing. I know that a lot of people are getting comments. The 10-cent fee is a very motivating thing. It's amazing how much it is to, that you want to avoid a small fee as compared to get a bonus. So I know that people are getting a lot of comments because it's very motivating. And I've also heard from Ms. Kennedy that that several retailers are hearing about this personally. But I would kind of like to ask if those kind of tactics are what we would like to govern our bodies. Kind of bullying maybe of tellers and things of the sort, or businesses as being a working tactic to change our minds. And I would hope that we don't allow that. And if there's any questions?
All right, I do have a few questions. Mr. Dyson, did you have a question for this individual? Yeah, go ahead.
Respectfully, that 10 cents would make a difference in people's conduct just seems so counterintuitive to me. I mean, it's probably been 10 years since I've carried change in my pocket, and I don't know what to do with it when I get it. And I think people are more just annoyed by it. And so, I mean, John over here is a guy that's in the retail business, and have you ever seen an item where 10 cents in price makes a difference in people's buying habits? It's just hard for me to believe, it doesn't. And I will have a question when we can maybe on the kind of bags that Crystal wants, if indeed the process will survive hot commercial washing, hot machine washing. Because most plastic products are thermal sensitive, and so on. But anyways, I said it. I can't see 10 cents changing people about anything.
Yeah, it really is a psychology of loss aversion. As I said, you won't go out of your way to pick up 10 cents, but when it's just a loss, there's just a lot of psychology around that to where people are really avoidant of any amount of loss. So even a 10-cent fee shows that it motivates people. And just time and time again, when these fees get implemented, it is the changer of habits.
Yeah, you already said that, and I heard it. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you. And this is because I wasn't here when the original ordinance was passed, these questions. You say it's a loss aversion tactic, but wasn't the point not to use plastic bags, not to worry about whether, I guess that's what I'm having a hard time reconciling. Was the purpose of the ordinance to stop the use of soft, single-use plastic bags or all single-use bags? Because that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect. And I'll have to say, while it may be a loss aversion tactic, that the studies show people buy more junk food too when they bring their reusable bag because they're rewarding themselves for doing something good. So we want to take in the whole picture. And did the original ordinance have a C with it for enforcement? I guess I have a lot of heartburn when we pass things if we don't put any teeth with them, because then they're just there. I wish I would have invited the retailers who have called me, although they won't probably show their faces, but they're just ignoring this. And they're just giving out paper bags. because they were like, well, what's the enforcement? I said, it's complaint driven. They're like, I don't think my customers will complain that I'm giving paper bags. So I'm still, I would guess I want to know more about the original purpose of the ordinance. I mean, and obviously I don't have the whereabouts clauses here, or the original memo here on the code, so I can't kind of get to it. So was it to bring your own bag, or was it just to not use the plastic bags?
I can put you in the queue if you want to answer that. Yeah.
Do you remember? Do you know? Were you part of the? I would presume you were part of the original ordinance.
Somewhat.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the driver of having this ordinance be implemented was just the amount of waste that we're seeing. So I couldn't tell you 100% if it's, I mean, plastic is definitely much worse for our waterways, but it's also just amounts of litter. I think.
Was it waste and litter concerned with any single-use bag or plastic?
I don't know if I could quite speak to that. I might
Okay.
hand that off to somebody.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Perez, for you, question for him.
Oh, yes, questioning. So I think you answered this, but that in your work, so if we simply replaced the plastic with another bag of whatever it's made of, from your perspective, that doesn't solve our problem. So if we just started giving out paper bags or bags made out of whatever, and exactly the same, this is I think to the question of my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that wouldn't necessarily solve our problem. Is it? So that's, I guess that's my question. In your experience, just replacing the plastic bags with another bag of another kind doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Is that true for you?
Yeah, especially if you're looking at the overall environmental impacts of things. Paper bags do take more energy, water, resources to make, take up more room, shipping costs, things like that. So if you're trying to look at an overall impact, if you're just going to replace them, it's not really a net gain overall. And also when you're putting that cost onto stores to give out a more expensive bag. And then also that cost then goes on to people who are bringing their own bags. So you're going to have a higher price being put onto maybe the more conscientious consumer who's bringing their own bags and now paying for everyone else's bags if you strip the 10 cents and just go to a paper bag. So there's a few facets there to why just going with the paper and doing nothing else is kind of costly in other ways.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just going to respond a little bit to Ms. Zolotel because she was asking questions about what our motivations were when we passed this. And I started out as a bit of a skeptic. I was not particularly jazzed about a plastic bag ban, but we received a tremendous amount of testimony that I found persuasive. And one of their key points was what the gentleman just said. We're not just switching from plastic to paper. We're trying to encourage reuse. And every time I go into the grocery store now and I forget my reusable bag, I beat myself up a little bit. But I'm learning. I'm getting better. And I actually am remembering it more often. And I think everybody is going through that process. And I'll say, yes, there probably are specific small retailers that are not complying. But if you go into Walmart, Safeway, Fred Meyer, they are complying. And that is the vast majority of these kind of reusable bags that are going out every day. I mean, there were probably thousands, tens of thousands being taken every day from those major retailers, and they have switched. And last night I was at this Halloween party, this big festive thing in East Anchorage, and where we gave out candy, but we also were taking donations in foodstuffs. And people were bringing in, there must be Walmart bags and Safeway bags. And every time I got one of those to put in, they said, "Can I have that bag back?" Every time I gave them their reusable bag back. So I think it's already having a tremendous impact. And I think that the fee is a crucial part of that, of this ordinance. And again, I started out as a skeptic, and they presented a ton of evidence when they were doing the original. And I looked into it, and I remember I was going through Portland, and they had a little fee, and I saw that. And so I think the fee is a crucial part of what we were trying to achieve, which is getting people to use reusable bags.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know if this has happened or not before, but has anybody tried using a sunset date for the 10-cent fee? I tried for 3 years, and once everybody kind of gets used to having their reusable bags, then take it off. I don't know. I'm just wondering. What's that?
Fail, where were you?
Well, I'm just seeing if I don't know. He might have information about that.
So I don't know of places that have set sunset dates on these types of things. There is data showing that people that are initially opposed to these bans, as time goes on, they are much more accepting and backing. Opinions do change once these things kind of become settled. So I think having some time is definitely valuable, but I think if they even did set a sunset date, people grow to like the change, even people that are initially opposed to these things. So even if they did, they might redecide on that.
So in your information that you have here, is there any information about jurisdictions that have tried that?
No, I haven't seen a direct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
But he did show that 3 years was the timeline that it took to establish a real pattern according to the analysis. So just in thinking through that, if that is a conversation that members would like to bring forward, it can be a year if you want it to work. Just a few things to Ms. Zalatel. The purpose was to reduce both litter and waste, and the way to do that was to motivate people to bring their own bag, right? And so the purpose is not to motivate people to carry paper bags now. That was not for sure.
That was the original word.
Yeah, and that, or at least in the narrative of the process where we got there. It wasn't to move people to paper, it was to move people to bring their own bags. That's why we defined reusable bags as clunkily as we did, is because we wanted to provide an alternative, but then a better alternative, the reusable. And but we didn't do a good job because narrowly defined, the word cloth must be woven. You know, broadly defined it isn't, but narrowly defined it is, and so that created some confusion to members of the public. And so the idea isn't to ban specifically all plastic products, but to ban all single-use plastic products. And then you asked the question about why machine washable. You don't have to machine wash it. That's not the idea, but it has to be durable enough to get through the machine, because my mom was a very careful shopper, right? And we washed every single plastic baggie and used it multiple times. And so the theory isn't to incentivize 4 mil thick plastic bags, which are those single-use bags ultimately for most consumers who aren't going to actually take that next step. But so that was the idea, is we need to go to something more cloth-like. And interestingly, in the California study, in their definitions, they even used the term cloth-like, right? And so I wish we would have caught that in the original process, because I presumed cloth and cloth-like were close enough, but I have learned that the law doesn't agree. At least our enforcers the law. To the question of enforcement and do people comply, it's interesting, but really in the end we aren't empowering police to go run around. We didn't want to create a person whose job it was to go police plastic bags. Our code enforcement people have important work to do, as is most of this. I personally, drive 70 some miles an hour on the highway, right? And I know.
You're kidding.
And so
Have a recorder on.
yeah, sometimes, not all the time. The theory there is that we want close. We don't want perfect. The purpose isn't to create a police state here. The purpose is to motivate people. And from my own anecdotal basis, there are some folks who have complained, but as you see in Ira's report that came to us by email, if you had a chance to read it, for the mass majority of people, we aren't hearing complaints. We're hearing a very narrow bandwidth of loud complaints about one problem we already addressed. And then this, I think, solves the last major technical problem, other than the people who just say, this is government overreach, you shouldn't do this to us. And so, to me, I would ask, and I have an AM that I have drafted up, that we look to redefine what the reusable bag is, and then we don't gut completely the intent behind the original effort, which was to add a fee and motivate people to bring their own reusable bags. And at the grocery store, if you stand there and count, it's an amazing thing to go see at Fred Meyer. Just go stand there for half an hour, 20 minutes. No, right at the door. Right at the door. I've been watching, because this is important to me. People are either opting not to take a bag because they didn't need it, or bringing their own bag 10 to 1. And like every 10th person is bringing out a paper bag. It's working. So let's let it work.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Several things. First of all, one of the things that I noticed, I appreciate Mr. Camp sending out the studies that he did, and I looked at those. And one of the things that I think all the Assembly members need to be aware of is that there is a huge disconnect between those studies and what we're trying to do and what we have done through the current ordinance. Most of these studies, including the fee versus the incentive one, the Scientific American one, these are talking about tax policies where they are taxing disposable bags and seeing what kind of effect that has. We're not taxing disposable bags. We've already simply banned them. So we've already taken a huge step in just banning the kinds of plastic bags that we think we don't want around here. And the other interesting thing that I found in the Scientific American report was a comment that said it's hard to measure the impact of plastic bag bans. So even though they certainly are trying to extrapolate out with the data that they can't necessarily make the connections that I think are being assumed here. And again, there's a terrible disconnect between those studies and how they went about in other locations getting rid of or reducing the use of plastic bags versus what we've done already in the current ordinance. So I will also say, too, that the vendors are screaming unfair competition, absolutely. And just for the reasons that Ms. Zolotel mentioned in terms of the fact that you can sell T-shirts at the Saturday, Sunday market and give them away in a plastic bag. But if you are, one of the once in a blue moon or cabin fever, one of the brick and mortar stores up on 4th Avenue, you have to use an alternative bag or expect the customer to bring in their own bag. And of course, we know that doesn't work very well with visitors. And it's interesting how we've made such a big deal over visitors lately, yet we're not really compensating at all in any way for what kinds of issues they have to deal with, other than we're now going to, they're going to come and spend $150 in our stores, but they're going to have to pay 10 cents for the paper bag to carry it out with. So it's kind of insulting. The other thing with the vendors is they are getting backlash from some of their customers, and it's probably more in our big box stores than it is in some of our smaller retail stores. I know for a fact, my son is cashier supervisor at Fred Meyer and Eagle River, and he has had to calm down customers on a regular basis. Now, I don't know if that's quite so much the issue right now, but it certainly was at the beginning. And there are definitely people who bring in their own plastic bags. People are out there buying their own plastic bags, getting them off of Amazon and taking them in. And I've even heard of people taking extras in case somebody in line in front of them didn't, complained about the fee or didn't have any bags. They could offer them to other people as well. So there's quite a bit kind of going on, I guess, under the radar from that, and there is definitely some backlash. The other thing that the vendors are concerned about is they are concerned about being fined. I think Ms. Solotel's right in that some of them are saying, well, my customers aren't going to complain if I don't charge them 10 cents. But other vendors are really seriously trying to figure out how to comply. And so in all fairness, they are trying to do the right thing, but this has gotten so complicated, so convoluted, and so contradictory in a lot of ways that they're not able to figure out exactly what it is they're supposed to do, and they're terrified that they're going to have, somebody's going to come in and check up on them in terms of, let me see your documentation about how many 10-cent bags you've sold, and they're not even told exactly how that documentation has to look. What kind of record keeping is required. So if somebody finds out they're not charging enough or often enough or regularly enough, then they're susceptible to all these fines. So they feel like they're being puts them in a vulnerable position. And so, and the other interesting thing about all this too is if you were to look at how we are really impacting the environment and how much these bags cost, the highest true cost bag in terms of how it impacts the environment and all the things that go into growing it and using herbicides and harvesting and transporting and manufacturing everything. The highest cost bag is actually a cotton bag. And typically, they do have some statistics, some data on how long somebody will use a reusable bag, and it's about 50 times. And I had somebody tell me, I use my bag. Every week I go to the grocery store, I take my bag. And I said, well, how long do you use that? Oh, I probably use it for at least a year. And then I throw them out and get new ones. And so I said, well, that kind of does make sense then. So if you're using it 52 times a year, you're reusing that bag, but there's still a huge cost to that. And these are still having impact on the environment regardless. So anyway, so there's a whole lot of reasons, just like I just stated, in terms of, I think, why we can get rid of the 10-cent fee, because this is just a burden on our community. I literally have people telling me, this is just one more sharp stick in the eye. And, and they're insulted by that. And they're ready to get rid of plastic bags. Don't get me wrong. That's exactly what this amendment does, is protects the idea of just getting rid of those flimsy, disposable, littering types of plastic bags. For the most part, obviously there are exceptions. The base is not doing that. J-Bear, you can go get your plastic bags and you can go get all your paper bags you want, and you're not going to pay a dime for any of them. So all of the military, active duty and retired, will have that advantage, whereas 90% of the rest of the public will not. But anyway, again, these are ways that we can make this work in terms of trying to reduce the use of bags. Also encouraging people, they're obviously going to have to get to the point where they get better about bringing their bags, they're reusable, and I think they are. So we can kind of put this into some kind of a perspective that will do both things. One of the things that I'm just really concerned about right now is the way that we are nickel and diming everybody in this community. We've raised fees for so many different things. We're going to basically raise the budget. Taxpayers are going to pay more for their solid waste services. They're going to be paying more for a waste stormwater utility pretty soon. We increased fines for building permits. We increased fines for fire safety system permitting. And, all of this does start to weigh on people. And I'm thinking there's a better way to do this. We can do this together as a community and work towards something that benefits everybody without it being such an annoying, irritating burden on everyone. But let's get better. Let's do the work. I appreciate Mr. Constance's amendment. I would love to see that. I haven't received that, so I'd love it if somebody could email that to me. And then if we can really figure out how to find the right balance in this, we'll make progress. And I think that's what we're all hoping for. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I just want to confirm with the clerk, I thought we had emailed Crystal the amendment. Okay, so the clerk just confirmed that she did email that to you. Mr. Whittleton.
Well, thank you. Couple points on this. When we were doing this before, the amount of waste, we see the litter, those thin bags, they blow easily and they're out in the world. Someone out there, I pick up a lot of litter in my neighborhood, and I'd find one bag and I would fill it with all kinds of other trash, typically booze bottles and water bottles and cups from McDonald's and so on. So, you go to landfill and they're blown around. So it's somewhat of a litter issue. But, Solid Waste Services had done a study and they drilled it. I recall it was something like plastic was the order of, 3 to 6%, I don't remember, of their volume, but the amount that was plastic bags, they said, was not noticeable. So the actual bags was not a real solid waste landfill issue. So not truly critical there. In plastic versus paper, and we went through this a lot at the time, but plastic is vastly less expensive than paper. The bag I go through typically, size was less than a penny. It's plastic, and now it's 2.25 cents paper. And the bigger sizes that were like 6 cents are now 30 cents. So there's a huge increase in cost of paper. And I think that reflects the inputs to it, whereas the plastic doesn't reflect kind of the downstream costs that we face. Some of the things in Crystal's changes match where we were for most of the process with the plastic bag ban, and that was kind of the thickness. We were bouncing around. I had said, let's make it 2 1/4. I think Eric had maybe 4 or 3 or something. We actually left a blank in the document when it came to us. And then there's amendment to say all plastic bags, and that one narrowly passed. And then, so we landed there. And then regarding Pete's thing, I did have an amendment to sunset the fee that didn't pass. And I think it was 3 years based on it. I think it was that study that said habits build, so let's give it 3 years. So anyway, that's the kind of background. But to address Fred and Crystal, my experience at the store, and it's borne out in these other studies, is that dime fee makes a huge difference. And you know, I can just describe it my store. And I would like to think my customers are above average in all ways, so it may reflect a typical shopper. But the dime fee has made a dramatic difference. We are going through less than 20% as many bags as we did before. And it's not a big thing. My staff just go, would you like a bag for a dime? Oh, no, that's okay. It just has not been an issue. There's been very few people who push back. And it's incredible how much fewer bags we have with no hassle. Some people bring their own, most just walk out without a bag. They just don't need it. You know, small retail, you're not getting cartloads of, groceries. But, I just say that the people I've heard talk radio and people contacted us with kind of issues that it actually borders on comedy. Well, I only get 6 items because that's all I can carry, so I go back to the store 3 times a day. That's not happening. I'm shopping on Amazon now because I don't get a bag at my local store. I'm sorry, that's simply, if that's their problem-solving solution, it's more on them than the bag ban. So anyway, if I were to do one thing to get rid of plastic or minimize it, in this thing, get rid of everything in this except for the dime fee. That is the most important thing. And anyone here is a free market person, and like the free market decide, knows the worst thing for a free market is free stuff. And when you give something away for free, people consume fast. There's no limitation. They consume vastly more than they should. Come by Bosco's on a normal Saturday, come by Bosco's on free comic day. Count the amount of comics that go out that door. Free stuff is bad for a free market. And when you charge a dime, you're telling people there's a cost to these things. Recognize it. And it's not only a cost to the retailer, but it's a cost, broadly, which I think is very evident. Whether it's and I think a move from plastic to paper is a crime against nature. Paper, from all I can see, is worse than the plastic. But making people make a rational choice in their purchasing decision is very effective, and that dime is extremely effective. So, anyway, I'm not sure where I stand on this whole thing, but I would say I simply would not support anything that gets rid of the dime fee.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdier.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I got my comments as well. I absolutely would oppose anything that would take away this 10 cents fee. My experience is similar to a few other members. We have kids. We know a lot of parents. We spend a lot of time in stores shopping for things constantly, and it has changed. The stores have completely changed, in my view. The Fred Meyer, the Safeway we go to. It is that simple moment of I only have 4 items. Do you want a bag? No, I'll put them in my pocket. And then now starting to bring reusable bags. Last night we were at a Halloween party with 50 other parents, and we actually talked about this issue last night, and it was overwhelming that it had changed people's behavior. So I am certainly a big fan of the 10 cent fee. I didn't understand it at first. I wasn't necessarily a fan of it, but in a relatively short period of time, I'm seeing significant change. And I have to say that my district isn't necessarily as populated with businesses as others, but I have not received what I would consider to be a significant amount of emails voicing concerns about this. And I met with a manager of cars, recently, and did not get feedback that this was a major problem for him. So so that's sort of where I stand. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. One thing that I heard earlier was that restaurants are allowed to use plastic bags restaurants are only allowed to use plastic bags under the current code insofar as they're to stop spillage for leakable material. But that was in the original ordinance. That hasn't changed in anything here. But restaurants and all vendors, beer vendors, etc., have to use paper bags. We didn't craft an exemption for them to use plastic bags, but they could use reusable bags. And so it was stated that the vendors could use plastic bags. We didn't do that. This ordinance would do that, and I wouldn't support that. With that in mind, I just hope over the weekend everyone goes to the grocery store and watches how this is working, because it's working, and I hope we don't go backwards so far so fast that we end the progress we've made. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I probably mentioned this during the debate when we were talking about this. But anytime you pass an ordinance or legislation to try to change people's behavior, it's challenging. You know, people we're beings of habit. We're into our habits, and so we want to keep doing things the same way we've been doing them. So just by passing a law or an ordinance, trying to change people, the way people do things is always going to be a challenge. But I go to Fred Meyer's a lot, and I know the security guards there at the front door, and so I asked them, probably a month or so ago, if how they thought the ban was working. And they said at first that people were really ticked off because a lot of them hadn't even heard about it. And so once they found out about it, they said most of the time it's not a big deal anymore. People remember their bags, and so I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a pretty high percentage of people who bring their own bags if they don't forget them in their cars. And sometimes they'll snap their fingers and say, "Oh yeah, I got to go get my bag," and they'll run back out. So we're getting there. It's just not something that's going to happen overnight. Thank you.
One last note. In Ira's report from upstairs, because he's the saint who had to face the brunt of the public conversation at the municipality. He got a lot of calls. He was receiving over 40 calls a day for 3 weeks. And now the calls are down to about every other day. And so the trajectory of the complaints as people have implemented the change has matched with a lot of what people are noticing, that people are just like doing it now. And so anyhow, I'll just end on that, and we'll be talking about this Tuesday.
Yeah, thank you. And before I turn it over to Ms. Kennedy to give a quick final comment, I just want to, again, thank Ira for putting this memo together. If you haven't read it, I suggest you do, and especially the recommendation portion where, I guess I'll just briefly read it. To minimize confusion, we should avoid making a series of small changes every few weeks to the ordinance. Instead, look at making whole cloth changes if we feel like we need to, and to solicit feedback from businesses before making future changes. So that was, I think, a very wise recommendation from Ira. With that, I'll turn it over to you to close us off, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would agree with that too. You know, in terms of changing everything, too often it's definitely just as confusing. But I think it was interesting to me to hear all the last three speakers talk about how the 10-cent fee is accomplishing its goal. And so to me, that means, okay, then we're done. So we don't have to keep making this hardship on people and this frustration, and we don't need to basically get into the weeds with people's business plans, because that's really what this comes down to, is how businesses react to this and how they adjust accordingly. If we have gotten to the point where people are not even asking for bags anymore, then we've accomplished the goal. So, like I said, all those comments basically make my point as to the validity of this amendment. So anyway, I will be bringing some of those sample bags that we need to make sure we allow in terms of reusable bags. So it'll be a little more colorful on Tuesday night. And anyway, I appreciate everybody's comments and the time. So thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to close this work session.